Right, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the British Ambassador's residence here in Kolonaki, which will be, sadly, for one of our last public events before the embassy, the residence rather, is given over to works to ensure seismic reinforcement, which in the circumstances of the last couple of weeks is probably timely. But it's a great pleasure to see you all here this evening, and a particular pleasure to be here for this evening's discussion on the financing gap in female entrepreneurship. Deputy Minister, Deputy Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, Stella and the team from Women on Top, all of our supporters and participants this evening, thank you very much for joining us. I'm very conscious that if this was 18 months ago, or indeed when the collaboration started, there was a female ambassador in this building. There isn't anymore, it's now me. But perhaps it makes it, I don't know, whether more or less relevant, pertinent, for me to start by saying, if only there were no need for discussions such as this. But of course there is, and we know that there is, because gender disparity is a sad truth in our societies, and as long as it exists and persists, we do need to recognise the fact and to do all we can to address it. The funding gap for female entrepreneurs is a phenomenon that can be directly linked to gender-related systemic and unconscious barriers. It is impacting, without doubt, social cohesion and global prosperity, and unfortunately, the evidence suggests that it is widening. Research findings are clear on this front. The discrepancy between male and female-led companies cannot be attributed to differences in content or competence of the founders, far from it. Several analyses suggest that even when women and men presented and pitched with comparable content, investors preferred male-led firms. Yet entrepreneurship does have the potential to offer a sustainable and positive path towards greater gender equality. So with this in mind, the embassy team and my colleagues, with our partners, committed to trying to create positive change for women driven by data. And before my arrival in 2021, the embassy embarked on a collaboration with Stella and her team from leading Greek NGO Women on Top, an organisation dedicated to the empowerment of female professionals and to promotion of gender equality in the labour market, to try and shed some light on the gender financing gap in Greece, recognising, of course, that it is a problem, sadly, not limited to here. It is very much true in the UK as well. We commissioned the study in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, a pandemic that we know exacerbated gender equality around the world, or at the very least highlighted it in even starker terms. Our aim was to provide insights from both the low and high technology business ecosystems in an effort to raise awareness around the importance of equal opportunities for the viability and long-term resilience of female-led enterprises in the post-COVID-19 era. The study, which was uploaded to Women on Top's website, has created lively discussion and has now been enriched further with new findings. We thought, therefore, now would be a good time to follow up with a panel discussion. So thank you for that. Can I just note at this point, as I said a second ago, that this is not a phenomenon that is limited to Greece in any way. Other countries, including the UK, are facing similar challenges, and governments across Europe and further afield have taken a number of initiatives to try and address the problems, but they persist. One such initiative was the Investing in Women Code. Launched in July 2019, the code was set up after access to finance was identified as the number one disparity between female and male entrepreneurs by the independent Rose Review of Female Entrepreneurship. a review based on in-depth UK-wide interviews and survey research, coupled with global best practice benchmarking. We believe that one of the best ways to share results and achieve success is by sharing the experience and know-how that we can gather wherever we can gather it from. So we're very keen to hear about the best practice existing here in Greece and how we can support each other going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, female entrepreneurs face various challenges in growing their businesses, but these hurdles are in no way insurmountable. With the right skills, mentors and resources, and crucially with a gender-neutral, gender-open mindset, women can see their businesses grow and thrive to the benefit of society as a whole. So, I hope this evening's discussion, building on the research already done and the progress already made, can help us drive and perhaps accelerate change through greater concerted collective action and shared ownership. I believe, echoing experts around the world, that what is good for gender equality is good for the economy and good for society as a whole, should be our rallying cry this evening. So I wish you all a very successful event. Let me thank you again for your attendance, and I will listen eagerly to learn from the discussion, the panel this evening. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. And I now hand over, I think, to Minister Syringella, if you're happy to come and say a few words. Κύριε Υφυπουργέ. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Mr. Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank for all the cooperation we had with the British Embassy concerning the risk assessment tool. It is a tool that we have in the counseling centers. It is for the women that are victims of gender-based or domestic violence. We know that women hold central roles in the labor market. When women have central roles in the labor market, economies develop more efficiently. Greece has taken brave steps regarding inclusion and equality in the working sector. For the first time since 2022, Greece has been among the 12 states all over the world which collect the score of 100% regarding legal equality between women and men. Of course, legal equality is a milestone, but it is not enough. Substantial equality needs to be ensured. It is true that one of the most crucial challenges we face is the financing gap in female entrepreneurship. That's why the creation of more opportunities for financial and social empowerment for every woman is one of our main priorities. For our government, it is essential to keep designing and implementing actions which enable the combination of family or personal life and work-life balance, and of course promote equal pay. In the next few days we will have a new European directive for pay transparency for all the not only in the public sector but also for the private sector. Female entrepreneurship is one of our goals, and women in leadership positions. We have also established the Greek Innovation Lab for Women. This lab aims to support women in the field of new technologies, and especially young women, research, of course, and innovation through actions ranging from education to activation of entrepreneurship based on the United Nations model for sustainable development. In addition, we have the Greek National Action Plan for Gender Equality, and through this plan we promote female entrepreneurship by setting specific goals and following a concrete strategy. We encourage women for international synergies and participation in transnational programs and fora for female entrepreneurship and startups in the cultural sector. We implement female entrepreneurship financing programs. We create financial instruments to support small businesses in the cultural and creative sector, encouraging collective business models, networks and partnerships, and interconnecting Greek cultural production with domestic and foreign markets. We promote seminars for training girls and women in entrepreneurship, and especially in schools. We strengthen female employment and entrepreneurships in the cultural and creative economy. We have a program called Acropol Across. Allow me to conclude by highlighting one of the most impact policies, that is the work-life balance policy. As a mother of two, and of course a working woman at the same time, I'm well aware of the significant weight of the responsibilities of family care, which both women and men who participate in the labor market bear. So we are implementing a series of actions to promote this balance and decrease women's interruptible career. Neighborhood nannies is one of the programs that we have for toddlers up to 2.5 years old. Childcare units within large companies. It is through the RRF program. Implementation of the quality labeling companies. This is something that we did together with Women on Top, and we would like to thank Stella Kaslagli for the help and support. And we have a new law which incorporates into the national law the directive of the European Parliament and of the Council on the work-life balance for parents and carers. Moreover, the numerous expansions of the paternal leaves aims to stop company policies of hiring men and women fearing of extensive maternal leaves. It is in our hands to ensure that our children, boys and girls, will grow up in a world where they will have equal opportunities, in a world where they will be able to follow their dreams, no matter their gender. To achieve this, we need to unite our powers, public organizations, local organizations, local government, of course NGOs, having good practices among us from all other countries, encourage more women in decision-making positions, empower our girls as parents to participate actively in innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. Thank you very much.
We thank the Deputy Minister very much for being with us, and we know that you need to leave soon, but thank you for coming. So after the British Ambassador and the Deputy Minister, I would like to invite Stella Kaslagli, co-founder of Women on Top, to say a few words. Thank you.
I will really say a few words. I left my notes out there, so... So thank you, Ambassador, for having us and for supporting this initiative. Thanks, a big thanks to the British Embassy team for putting the event together and supporting the whole process. Thank you to Angeliki and Karen and Vicky and Dimitris and Marisa for not only being here as speakers today, but also taking part in this research. Some of you were integral parts of helping us gathering the data. You know, research is now a big part of the work we do at Women on Top, because we realized that in Greece we don't love data very much, especially data having to do with gender equality. So we don't have a clear picture about what's happening in most cases. Up until 2 years ago, there was a great dearth of data. Now things have started improving, and I think the Minister can attest to that, we have started gathering more data all together. All of us who work on the field of gender equality. So this research, this piece of research was one of the first ones that we undertook as Women on Top. And it was a seminal piece of research for us, not just because we really enjoyed working on that, but because we learned so much. We learned things we didn't know. We had to reconsider things that we thought we knew. And for example, we had to think really hard about how can a for-profit financial organization, institution, integrate all the learnings from the social impact supporting organizations, which do much better in terms of gender equality. When we looked at the data, we saw that these organizations with a social aspect had a great difference compared to purely for-profit venture capital firms, for example. So how can we integrate the social and the financial aspect together? That was a question for us. Another thing that we didn't know was that the nature of the gender financing gap was different depending on the kind of businesses that a woman would build. So the reasons for the financing gap in the high-tech enterprises was vastly different from the financing gap, the reasons for the financing gap in small enterprise. So there were lots of surprises for us and lots of learnings. And the best thing about this research was that as soon as we planted this seed, the seed of this small study, we started seeing things change. So we would watch people who had told us during the research that they are not really interested in adopting initiatives to promote gender equality, start thinking about that. We saw initiatives being launched. We saw discussions happen. So during these 2 years, lots of things started to change, and we think that this is a great time for change to happen. So we are so happy to be here today, because we need to learn both from the best practices that have been implemented here in Greece over these 2 years, and before, of course, but we also need to learn from best practices coming from the UK and from other countries as well. And I think we are very eager to hear what you also have to say about your learnings, your experiences, the initiatives you have discovered from other parts of the world. So thank you so much again for supporting this initiative, for being here with us today as speakers, as participants, with any capacity you are here today with. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'm looking forward to listening to this discussion.
I guess we can start, right? Thank you so much, and I hope I'm speaking for all of us, for the invitation to take part in this discussion and to comment on the research piece that Women on Top put together with the support of the Embassy. And we heard a few things from the ambassador, from the Vice Minister, and Stella, but although I'm not very much into numbers, I have jotted down a few numbers so that I hope we're all on the same page. So we know, the ambassador said it clearly, that the gap in finance is not a Greek phenomenon. It's a universal phenomenon. It happens all over the world in a slightly different way, in a way that reflects the economy and society. Everywhere, access to finance is harder for women. And as Stella said, in Greece, one of the problems we have is that we do not have enough data. And I would add that we're not interested in data generally, not only when it comes to gender. We have some data, though, and they are, I think, crucial in understanding the gap in financing. So of all businesses in Greece, 25% are predominantly run by women. Larger businesses are run by women less often than small ones, and we classify them on the basis of both turnover and the number of employees. Now, 62% of women who embark on the journey of entrepreneurship use their own funds, and this tells us something right from the beginning. This is one of the outcomes of the research. Women tend to apply to fewer sources of funding than men do. They feel more comfortable applying to their families for lending and then to the banks. So although there's a broad variety of options available to them, they either don't know it or they don't feel like applying to other sources. So they have limited knowledge about sources of funding, and sometimes they also have limited knowledge on the practicalities of running a business, and this is something that also shows along the way. So this is just to paint the beginning of a picture, like a sketch of the topic we will be discussing now. Now, why does this happen? There are many reasons, some of them that I've singled out again from the research. First of all is the low participation of women in entrepreneurship in general. The nature of businesses led by women, which are mostly in commerce and services. These are the most typical enterprises led by women. the attitude of women towards funding, their second thoughts about asking for money, the biases of funding organizations towards women on the other end, so there's a problem on both sides, and finally, the small number of female investors, of funds that are led by women or have a significant number of women as part of their board. So I think that this gives us an idea of why gender gap might be a problem in Greece. Now, we definitely need equal access to funding. The ambassador already pointed to it. It has to do with long-term economic growth, and also it has to do with society. It's something that we need for reasons that go much beyond the content of our discussion today, the limitations of our discussion. So tonight we'll have the chance to discuss some of the findings of the research with 4 people with varied backgrounds and with a good knowledge of both the Greek, the UK ecosystems, and the international business world as well. So just to introduce them briefly to you, Ms. Karen Nunn, who's a board member of the British Association of Women Entrepreneurs, Marisa Antonopoulou, the Chief Operating Officer of AFI, the Action Finance Initiative, a microfunding organization in Athens, Mr. Dimitris Kalavros-Voussiou, the only man on the panel, appropriately, co-founder and general partner of Velocity Partners Venture Capital. He's one, but he's good enough. He speaks for many. He's powerful. And last but not least, Professor Vicky Price, Chief Economic Advisor and board member at the Center for Economic and Business Research. So our hope is in the about 45 minutes that we have for our discussion to shed light on some of the key findings of the research, single out similarities and differences between the situation in Greece and in the UK, and hopefully also identify potential solutions to the problem by means of identifying best practices. So, Karen, I would like to start with you. And you have an experience in entrepreneurship for many, many years. And as we love stories. I particularly love stories. I think that it's better to start with a story. So why don't you give us a bit of your background and to highlight some of the challenges that you have faced over the years?
I would say that I was very fortunate to be born to a headmaster and a teacher who showed me exactly what I didn't want to do. My first swimming lesson was by my father at the age of 3, where when I got home, my mother said, "How did she do?" And my father said, "Well, she's too bloody minded to sink." And apparently I got that from my grandmother. My grandmother was an amazing woman. She built her way up in the insurance industry to become very senior in aviation insurance, and I watched her avidly as a child. She inspired me no end, and she was very much an entrepreneurial spirit in a corporate structure, and boy did she know how to play the game. So she was my inspiration. I set my first business up when I was 16 and just about to do my A-levels. I was very into my sport at school. I was school's games captain, house games captain, deputy head girl, prefect, anything that I could get a badge for, I would try. I was very competitive with myself. And so I started my own business in the fitness industry. I saw Jane Fonda go for the burn. I thought, she can, I certainly can. And I set up my own fitness consultancy and grew that over 15 years and sold it to buy my first property. I then went into corporate, which was with Cyprus Airways, where I got I got a bit of a nickname called Papagalos, because every time I heard words, I would ask and kept repeating things to try and understand what everyone was saying. So I then went out to Cyprus and lived there for a year, where I set up Cyprus hotels reservations on teletext. Can you believe it? All those years ago. And I was fortunate to live there for a year, get under the culture, get to understand what it was like to be an entrepreneur using somebody else's money. And I've been a serial entrepreneur ever since. I've been in and out of corporate, and I've even taken my entrepreneurialism into corporate environments, such as setting up, liquidating business units within a large organisation in order to operate with all of the things I love doing, again, with other people's money. And in the last 10 years, I've kind of taken it into a different angle, and I'm starting to do, I've got hair product ranges, I co-own a fire extinguisher range, I've got an energy shot, so I'm a true entrepreneurial spirit I just can't stop myself. Wherever there's an opportunity, I'm there.
Thank you so much. And now I'm going to turn to Vicky. Vicky, you have a mixed experience, right? So you have a mixed experience ranging from academia. You've been a co-founder of a company. You're an economist. You write about the economy. And I would like to ask you, if you want to comment on the wider economic impact of having more women entrepreneurs. Why do we need more women entrepreneurs, and how can we go about having them?
Okay, thank you very much. So just to explain that I'm Greek from birth. I come from a very entrepreneurial family, and I early on decided that the risks were too great, so I became a corporate economist instead. And it was only later in life that I started being more of an entrepreneur. And that just comes to also show how women generally perceive moving into this area. So we do know from all the surveys that there are that women are slightly, considerably more risk averse than men. And also they lack some confidence in terms of going out and asking for funds from people. That's why they start using their own funds or their family's funds. And that's why actually when you look across the developed world, when you look at the OECD, what you find is that women's capital is about 50% lower when they start their businesses than is the case for men, because they just don't go out to ask for it. And what they do, which is really quite interesting, if you look at any of the surveys of budding entrepreneurs, is that women take it far more seriously before they start it. They like to train, so first in the thing that they want to do, if they become self-employed, for example. Whereas what the men do, so they take a bit of time to get to the point, by which time maybe that opportunity is gone. Whereas the men just immediately have an idea and start getting clients, just looking at, who's going to buy this thing, irrespective of whether I'm the best person to do this. That, of course, you find across any walk of life, so that the men have that extra confidence, which is something which is, I think, back to the issue of having enough role models, having enough networking opportunities, having mentoring, and having, frankly, also the training and the financial training that is absolutely essential. It doesn't mean that women are not better educated than men these days, which they are, in terms of what they achieve when they're at school or university. It's just that there is still the lack of role models up there. And the fact that it's moving, and it's moving really well, it's also moving in Greece, is fantastic. But a lot of the issues that were just explained happen in the UK as well. So there is a funding gap here too. We're trying very hard to see how that can be filled. The ambassador spoke about the Alison Rose review. Things seem to have improved a little bit in the last few years because, of course, she calculated the impact on the economy if you had entrepreneurial levels in the UK that you also see in places like the US and Canada, and that would add something like 250 billion to the economy. That's good. But as it is, we try and estimate the impact that women-owned and women-led businesses have in the economy. And the Federation of Small Businesses does this survey, or has done quite a lot of analytical work, to try and see how much they contribute to the economy. And what they found is, first of all, we don't have enough data to separate women-led from women-owned, and at the end of the day, you try and merge them a little bit together, because their criteria have to do with, do you own it more than 50% in terms of shareholding, or do you people on the board make decisions, are women more than 50% of that? You add it together and you get something like 28% of people employed are employed by SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, which are either managed or led by women, which is important. If you get a little bit more of that, then that will make quite a difference. And also what you find is that, yes, of course, we know that women being more employed and contributing more to the economy will make a big difference, as we know. If you use people to the full skills, then you improve productivity and growth. And also, if you encourage more firms to start, you improve productivity as well. There's more competition, maybe more ideas. But what you find is that the ideas that women have into the areas that they are advised to go into tend not to be, I think there was a hint of that in the research, tend not to be in the areas where there is perhaps real potential for growth. So what happens is that they then don't expand. And they go into areas which they feel they're competent to do, which could be more sort of design, creative thing up to a point, or beauty salons, or some advisory possibly. But when you look, I just looked before I came. There is a website that says 39 best jobs for business opportunities for women, and you find all the ones that I just mentioned. Then you look at 39 best job opportunities for men, and of course construction comes first, IT comes up there. I mean, all these sort of things that are really absolutely needed. But there is quite a lot of hope. First of all, attitudes are changing, and you mentioned already what happens with all these women, quite a lot of very rich women. There are some around, mainly inherited from their husbands or their families, I have to admit, for the moment, who are putting a lot more money into women-led firms. So we hear probably a little bit more about that. And they are in what we call impact investing, which I think was also mentioned. But what you also find is that women tend to go for more areas and companies that are more concerned about the environment, sustainability, doing good. So rather than just making profits, that may of course mean that they may not grow as fast as you want them to, but they add an extra dimension, which is exactly what we want. And COVID itself, from being able to work from home, managing kids, because there is no doubt, the Alison Rose review itself, Alison Rose, by the way, is now the head of NatWest Bank, said that 46% of the women surveyed said that the principal concern about being able to get the funding and expand the business was having children. I mean, motherhood intervenes, I'm afraid, and you end up reducing both your ambitions, but also the way you're viewed by the people who might come and fund you. Also, those who come and employ you. There is still a lot of prejudice in the UK, despite the fact that it's illegal to ask a woman when she goes for a job whether, how she's going to look after her kids. 30% of HR recruiters still ask it. So yes, there is progress. COVID, being able to work from home and do things differently, helps. The digital revolution helps, but we're still a long way behind.
Thank you. The change of attitudes is something that we see here too, but I'm afraid that we see many of the shortcomings here as well. Women are risk averse, but one thing that we tend to forget is that women are also criticized more than their male counterparts in case of a failure. So if a male entrepreneur starts a business, runs a business and fails, it's okay, he's given another chance. If a female entrepreneur follows the same path and she fails, then most people just tell her that she should have done something different in the first place. And I'm saying this because I'm the example of a failed entrepreneur myself. And when my business failed, that was like 13 years ago, and it failed bad. I mean, I lost all the money I had ever made in my life. The first thing that people had to say to me was, you were never meant to be an entrepreneur. And for 12 years, it's something that is playing in my mind again and again and again. So business failure in women is not tolerated. It's okay in the case of men. So women then start doing something different that is more comfortable, and it's not going to raise as much criticism, just as a little addition here. So let me now turn to Marisa. Marisa, an interesting finding of the research is the fact that the gap in finance has to do with the size of the businesses and also sometimes with the type of the businesses. So I wanted to ask you why this happens and what we can do to remedy it.
So I am here to speak on behalf of the smaller businesses because my role is in microfinance, and I meet the smaller businesses, the micro businesses, but the fact is that these businesses do represent over 95% of entrepreneurship in Greece. So we might think that they're small amounts, but in the long run, they do represent a huge part of entrepreneurship in Greece. So according to our experience at AFI, is that female entrepreneurship and funding for females is close to what it is for men, for smaller amounts. However, I will end up saying that this is also part of something that we actually do as an organization in order to promote this. So, can I go? I have a small presentation to...
Sure.
Yeah, I have some data in a presentation. So basically, because one of our main objectives at AFI is to promote equality in financing for women, and this is at the core of microfinance as well. As you know, many of you might know, microfinance started as a tool to fund women in Bangladesh. So it's very important for microfinance to reach these women and fund them. So maybe our experience might be a bit biased, and this is why I found it very interesting that in the smaller amounts there is indeed much higher equality in funding. But as we go towards higher amounts, larger businesses, the gap widens disproportionately. What I feel there is, because in smaller amounts there is smaller risk. So indeed, women are more risk averse. However, this also means that they fare much better in long-term decision making. Also, they pay back much better. From our experience, 80% of our loss comes from men-owned businesses, even though 48% of our loans are given to women. So our experience is that a woman, even if she takes a loan, even if her business closes, she will repay that loan, whereas the experience is not the same with men. When we started viewing this topic, we were very lucky to coincide with funding from Fondation Chanel, which allowed us to go into this whole topic much more in depth, and gather a lot of data on this and do a lot of things within our organization in order to promote female entrepreneurship. One of these is a white paper that we co-created together with Women on Top, and you will see a lot of findings from the survey done by Women on Top as well. So one finding is that businesses set up by Greek women tend to be smaller in size, with fewer employees and limited access to finance. And as was mentioned before, is that 62% of women start their businesses with their own funds. A positive finding is that 8.7% of women indicate lack of funding as the main reason for ceasing their activities, but this has started to decrease as time goes by, from the time that the survey was conducted. On the other hand, it's very encouraging to see that the women involved in ICT has almost doubled to 16% from 8.6%, breaking gender stereotypes. And this is something that I will combine with something that I will say later, that it's very, very important to show role models in higher funding opportunities. And this percentage, the fact that it's doubled, is because of knowledge, access, role models, and opportunity for women. So in microfinance, when a woman comes to us asking for funding, we don't say, why you? We say, why not you? And this is empowerment, which is very, very, very important for women across the board. So I won't, because a lot of things said in my presentation have already been said. So I will just conclude saying what we do in order to enhance this gender equality within our organization. So gender equality is embedded in our mission and in our KPIs. Each employee is held accountable for these KPIs, for gender equality KPIs, and we also collect a lot of data, analyze it, and put it out there. We have an internal evaluation and gender action plan within the organization, not only how we fare internally as an organization, but also how we treat the women and what products we have dedicated to women entrepreneurs. We do continuous training and in-depth knowledge of what the challenges are specifically for women entrepreneurs and how to address them. And also we do awareness campaigns, knowledge dissemination, and make it known that it is our mission to support women. So we make it known to women that here you are accepted, here we want you to be an entrepreneur, here we want you to succeed, and here we also want you to have failed and try again. And this has very good results for our organization. It's 43% of women funded in total, but ever since we started implementing the Gender Action Plan, demonstrating role models, promoting the fact that we are here for women, this is 48% is the percentage of women funded in 2022 from our total portfolio. So, yeah.
Thank you, Marisa. And if I may, I can add some information coming from the People's Trust, which is another microfinance organization in Athens. It's a program led by the Athanasios Laskaridis Foundation. I have the privilege of sitting on the board of the People's Trust since 2015. And we have so far funded over 540 businesses. And 49% of them are led by women, are female-led enterprises. And we do not have a set of KPIs specifically, but we do collect data from the very beginning, and we have data on gender and on many other parameters that have to do with SMEs in Greece. It's interesting because we have an evaluation committee that has 3 female members, 2 male members. And this might be, this may facilitate the procedure, but we're just alert on the issue. We haven't had so far, frankly, to go overboard to support women, because the numbers of applicants and the numbers of grantees are close to 50-50. And this is something that we see year in, year out. And it's a lot, 540 businesses is a good indicator, both of the types of applicants who come to us and perhaps go to AFI as well. So these are people who feel that a microfinance institution is a place that does not intimidate them. And this makes a difference. And this also leads me to Dimitris now, because one of the, it seems that, that funds are, that women receive less money from funds than they receive, investment funds than they receive from any other source. And in a way, this has to do with their aversion of women to go to funds. And I would like to ask why this happens.
Of course, yeah. Thank you. First and foremost, thank you so much for the kind invitation. I feel really, privileged to be part of this panel. I think, it's about time to start seriously discussing what's happening in terms of quality in venture capital, which is where I'm coming from. Before answering the question, maybe giving a bit more context as far as what's happening in the startup economy in Greece or beyond and beyond. I'll start by saying that I'm a very fond believer of women leadership. So a couple of organizations I founded before joining the dark side of venture capital is, and you might have heard of them, is TEDx Athens and Foundation. So TEDx Athens is one of the leading events, part of the TEDx family. We started about 14 years ago. 60% of the leadership team at TEDx Athens is women, number one. That's happening since almost year one. 55% of the whole team is women at TEDx Athens. Foundation, which is a prime organization as far as digital transformation and startup economy is concerned, one of the first accelerator businesses in the country is 50-50. My fund is 4-0, so we were an all-male partnership, unfortunately. And I want to highlight the word "unfortunately" because I can tell you, I can speak for hours about this topic. I found myself so many times feel quote-unquote trapped by the fact that we didn't have enough diversity in terms of our way of thinking and our way of analyzing the people we had in front of us. So with that in mind, some numbers. So Foundation publishes every year an annual report on what's happening in terms of venture financing in this country. Some of these findings, and the number I'm going to mention now was also included in the Women's Top report about the gender financing gap, and it goes like this. So during the last 5 years, there were 6 active funds investing in venture capital in this country. How many women were part of these partnerships, or with how many funds? 2 out of 6. 2 out of 6. In one out of these 2 funds, you had an equal partnership, so 2 male, 2 female partners, which was, I would say, it was a very progressive thing. You know, the teams were actually formalized in 2017, just to give you an estimate of the maturity we had back then about a variety of issues that have to do with women representation in business. So this was a very, very bold move. We have to emphasize that. So during these last 5 years, the total companies that got funded by these 6 funds were 163 or 64. This is the number. So for each, you know, for every 10 companies that were funded through the Equifund, through an Equifund fund, how many women were actually the leading figures of these enterprises? 2. So 2 out of 10. Is this number, you know, way behind European average? It's not really way behind. So it's I would say 2.2, 2.3, based on Atomico's similar kind of initiative that monitors venture financing across Europe. Does this mean that we're doing well, or just by being close to the European median? No, that's not enough. That's for sure. Since I'm not really a big fan of just throwing numbers, I want to maybe mention a couple of ideas that might be considered solutions as well. So the other day, I was reading the news. There's a well-established media outlet covering startup economy news funded by Financial Times called Sifted. So the article was mentioning a very well-established, and I want to emphasize the word well-established fund in the UK, actually actively raising for the new fund. They're trying to close this year. And one of the comments of the article was some of the LPs, LP means the limited partner of the fund, which is essentially an investor. You have to understand in venture capital, we're barely financial intermediaries. So we control other people's money and we invest in a variety of companies. We create a portfolio. We also invest our money in these funds. That's why we have some sort of an alignment. And LPs are investors. So the article was mentioning that one of the leading UK funds, they're having trouble raising their new fund. Why? Because they have no female partner. So actually, the constant feedback they were getting by organizations like BBB, which is the British Business Bank, it's a state-owned equivalent of the European Investment Fund, which is the most active investor in venture capital across Europe, is you're not going anywhere without a female partner. You're not getting any money out of us. Oh, maybe someone else will choose to invest in you, but not us. So I'm a big fan of a top-down approach here. Okay, top-down means that as long as people who invest in venture capital decide not to invest purely on financial returns, because this is why I mentioned the phrase well-established. They make money for their investors. That's not the case. They're good in what they do. As long as you don't have a female partner, it's no go for us. So I think this is something we should all, start also exploring as a prerequisite in this part of Europe and in Europe in general. Be able to demonstrate that you have inclusivity in your partnership level. Be sure that you have inclusivity in terms of the way you choose to work with startup companies with a variety of things and a variety of processes or sub-processes. I'm going to give you another example, which is quite an interesting one. So the way we make money is a performance fee. So if the fund makes money, essentially there is a thing that's called carried interest, which is part of the proceeds, goes to us as the partnership that controls the fund. So I'm thinking, how about reducing the 20% profit carried interest fee, which is the market standard in VC across Europe and I would say also in the States, if you don't get a certain quota in terms of women-led startups. Say for every 20 or 20 companies that you're going to have in your portfolio, 50, 45, 50, 55, depending on how you put the threshold. This is the quota you have. So I think we need to be a bit more creative and a bit more open to really start witnessing change. Both points are mentioned. I think, so if some of you invest in VC, please do consider these 2 points next time you speak with someone like, me. And bring them in front of the discussion by saying, this is a prerequisite for me. It's okay if you don't want to work with me, but this is how it goes. So this is how we change, essentially, sometimes by force. Thank you.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Since you mentioned the UK, if I may, there is an element of box ticking that takes place. So you're required to have a woman, 2 women, like a little bit like what's happening right now in the UK about boards. So you have to have percentage of women, but many of them are non-executive directors and they sit on lots of boards and they don't actually make very much difference to the way the company is run. But there is quite a big issue about investment decisions. And it seems that looking at the venture capital industry, that the data from Europe shows that if you have a woman in the selection process for deciding, allocating money, the chances of a woman getting it increase by 25%. So there is an actual reason for doing it. It's not just the box ticking exercise, it is that the outcomes can be different.
I just want to highlight and stress what you just mentioned. I think it's a matter of empathy. I think we tend to forget that venture capital essentially during the very early stages of a company, pre-seed and seed, is all about people. And we just look into numbers and, quite frankly, we have invested in 22 companies during the last 5 years. Haven't seen a single company delivering on their promises, okay? And I had countless arguments with my partners about, being a bit more empathetic towards our partner, to our founders, and not being the policeman or whatever in the room. Last but not least, and I will make a connection here. I think venture capital is a business in which being an actual good person is part of the unique selling proposition. And I think that we have a lot of things to learn from female investors, because they bring this empathy, they bring this ability to read between the lines, and really be of real support towards the founders we work with. No, male or female founders, doesn't really matter. So yeah.
Interesting. A framework and procedures and checks, many things on our agenda. And I'm going to turn again to you, Karen. Based on your entrepreneurial experience and your position now, what needs to change in order to overcome this barrier, practically speaking?
I agree with Dimitri in terms of the top-down approach. I think even outside of entrepreneurialism, if you look at management structures, it's all quite even up to a certain level, and then all of a sudden, pam, the women drop out and the men are there, and quite often I think it is due to women having children. I do think that is the elephant in the room. However, I've got 3 children. I've only ever taken 2 weeks for maternity leave for each of them, and none of them have gone without anything, either from my love or anything really that's really important. I would say that we need to look at one thing I've mentioned previously in something that I wrote was the Hewlett-Packard report back in 2014, where it was an internal report where they looked at the differentiate between men and women per se, and they said that the findings were that 60% men feel that they're qualified enough, and women don't unless they're 100%. And so my question in terms of the funding gap is, are we as women looking at the fact that the funding says these are the requirements, and we say, oh, we have to fulfil that by 100%, and the men are looking and going, oh, 60% is fine, we'll enter. And so is that the differentiate? I think that there is a history of a boys' club. There is a history which wasn't helped in the 1950s by the propaganda campaign, which was a woman should be behind the sink and have the meal on the table and everything should be lovely at home, and that kind of perpetuated the boys' club to a certain degree. My grandmother's view, I'll come back to her because she was a real balanced lady. Her view was that she knew as many people from underprivileged backgrounds that were super intelligent and did brilliant things, as much as she knew those from privileged backgrounds that were ineffective. Her view was that balance was important and that skill sets don't come with a gender bias. I know that in my own marriage, my husband and I have a fantastic relationship, but I am the one that's the risk taker, and he's institutionalised and completely risk averse. He will say, darling, don't you think we need to learn, to cut our cloth here? My response is, cut cloth? I don't cut cloth, I make it. He'll say, how much do we need to save? I go, how much do we need to make? So that's just my relationship, and there are lots of men-women situations where there doesn't have to be a gender-specific way forward, and a woman doesn't have to act like a man. And my husband's quite senior in television, and one of the things that he's just delighted at in recent times is that some of the women directors coming through, where they historically were desperately trying to be like men and lots of swearing and aggression, are now being more authentically themselves. And it's such a pleasure now to actually work in an environment where people are starting, and particularly women are starting to feel more comfortable and authentic in their own skin. So to your point in terms of what can we do, I agree with Dimitri. I think from the top down we need to work. The BBC, initiated by a man, set up a 50-50 campaign to try and level the number of women to men employed across all regions, which has been hugely successful. And again, that was from a top-down position. So that's one angle that I'd like to sort of position.
Thank you. And Marisa, we've discussed the top-down approach, but you have discussed thoroughly the SME, your experience from SMEs. What do you think that we should take from the SME world when it comes to the finance gap, and then extract it and use it for larger businesses as well? I mean, what are some of the good practices? You mentioned some already, but it would be nice to highlight them. I mean, what is in there for us to keep when it comes to larger businesses as well?
So I am very for the top-down approach. There is a risk of this being viewed as ticking boxes and favoring women just because they're women. So we must be very aware of not making this mistake. And when we're making the decision, make sure we understand why we are doing it and not just do it to tick boxes. But I am also very much in favor, and we implement the bottom-up approach. So imposter syndrome is real. And As women, and women in Greece specifically, we have a lot of baggage to shed from our shoulders. When I speak with women, a big part of why they're afraid to go into business is because they don't have the support, and because entrepreneurship is not for women. And this is not something of the 50s, it's something of today. So role models and really down-to-earth role models, showing them women who've done it not with a big bang, but they've done it in a messy way. They've done it being scared, and they've succeeded, failed, and got up again and moved on. Giving this knowledge to women, giving these role models, and just giving them the empowerment to move forward. I think this is very much what small organizations in the field that come into contact with women have to do, showing them that this, what you said, the 60%, showing them the difference, that you have to actually put it in front of them, that look, you can do it. Whereas for men, this is not the case. So yeah, we need to work with women to empower them, give them knowledge, and also work with our children in the educational system, not only with girls, but with boys as well.
Absolutely. And role models are very important, but we need, I think, role models that are close to real life, because in this country sometimes you see role models that are far away from the average person, not in the case of women at least. So we need examples of women who were successful, went through hardships, because this is how real life works, who are not afraid to talk about it, because the change-making process has ups and downs. And I think this is the type of model that we need more of, because otherwise we see, these glossy pictures of women who seem to have been privileged from birth, and real life never works like that.
And may I add, we must stop using the word girl boss. It's boss.
Yeah, okay. When it comes to terminology, I think we have to correct lots of things, but let's leave this for the break. Now, Vicky, you have a good overview of the international scene. So if there are some things that you would like to share with us from your experience?
Well, that's interesting, because we talked about the UK and how we are facing similar problems, but thinking of ways of changing things, how COVID intervened up to a point. Yes, there is a sort of code, but quite a lot of people have lost the ability to. The research suggests that women who start their businesses also depend on support and sponsorship, and also a good bank relationship manager who understands what their issues are, understands them, and what it is that they want to do. Now, what's been happening in the UK, unfortunately, is that banks are becoming a lot more centralized. A lot of branches are disappearing. So if you really want some support locally and regionally, you just don't get it anymore. So it actually becomes a little bit more difficult if you are not, if you don't fall into a class that is easily understood by whoever gets the piece of paper, or not paper any longer, the online application for a loan or support or whatever, because they just don't know you. And that is bad for men too, but it's particularly bad for women if they have ideas which are different, if they are a woman with kids, that sort of stuff. But in terms of how, there is a venture capital fund gap, but also a funding gap more generally in most developed countries. And I'll tell you which ones are the best, which are always trying to emulate. It's the US, Singapore, Sweden, New Zealand, Canada, in this order. Yeah. Australia, Switzerland, France, which was a real surprise, because the UK always thought that they were the closest to the US and the previous Commonwealth by comparison to Europe, which was really lagging behind. Well, they've caught up to a very considerable extent. So the UK comes number 9, just above Thailand. You'd be interested to know that until recently, anyway, Russia was number 15. So it was doing okay, but who knows what's going on right now. We're not at the top. I mean, Greece, I'm afraid, is way behind. And in fact, it probably wasn't. But this is an OECD comparison. And there are serious problems across the whole OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which basically represents all the developed countries. And Turkey actually is quite high, somewhere there as well. And in terms of the things that they are all sort of supporting, it's obviously different sectors depending on where you are, but I mentioned the digital revolution. I mean, things are changing very considerably, so there are many more opportunities. But there are problems with child support everywhere, but there are some countries where child support is considerably more extensive than is the case in the UK. So if you look at all the Scandinavian countries, they have much bigger equality all across. And the interesting thing is that places like Ireland have suddenly developed as really equal in terms of gender funding availability, which is, very good. Of course, it's a smaller country and it needs all the entrepreneurs it gets. Plus, it gets loads of foreign money now coming in a very, very big way, and they all expect to follow these rules, if you like, and are looking for lots of interesting ways to proceed. But so if you look at the structure of each country, obviously there are different banking structures, which I mentioned already, different support for child care. We're trying in the UK desperately now to see whether perhaps that childcare, which is the most expensive in Europe practically, can be dealt with, because it keeps entrepreneurship and also women's participation in employment a lot less. But we've got to bear in mind some other things. There are countries across the world where if you're trying to start a business, you have, property rights are not there. The ability to do particular types of jobs are not there. The World Bank does constant reviews of this. I've used a lot of that evidence to show the difference that will be made in a book I wrote called Women versus Capitalism, which just showed that it doesn't happen on its own. That what we need is norms, of course, that develop, but which are dictated, the top-down approach, dictated by government in the sense of what is acceptable, what isn't, and so that companies that don't do the right thing, if you like, in terms of equality, not just box-ticking, are also perhaps not the ones that do work for the government, or there are some ways of in fact making it work in practice. And it varies again how much one takes it forward. So in other words, you really don't subcontract to a firm that doesn't have an equal participation, the 50-50 that you mentioned about, or money is not available for them. And yet, I looked again on the way over to here while my sister was driving the car quite fast, at what you mentioned the British Business Bank, right. Dimitri, and also the money that was available during COVID, when there was a lot of funding that was made available, a lot of loans were sort of subsidized. We now have a serious problem that all the banks that have announced their results are putting huge provisions because they think those people took on so much debt that a lot of it may not be repaid, particularly because of the energy crisis we've had since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But there was a future fund, if you remember, which went for all those ideas to start, new concepts during COVID. Only, I think, 1.7% went to women-led firms. So perhaps the government itself needs, I used to work for the government, needs to think a little bit more about how it can take the words forward in terms of also implementation and rewarding those that do well and perhaps leaving the others that don't in this respect behind.
Thank you, Vicky. And I'm going to turn to Dimitris again. You made your position very clear, and your position, I understand, is not the average one. So I would like to ask you for more of an inspirational closing, if I may. What would the ideal situation in about 10 years from now look like in this country? I mean, if we could put together all the things that we discussed, and if we could work really fast.
I don't want to...
the storyteller in you,
Yeah. I don't want to be too aggressive, but I would say that, I would love to say that in 10 years from now, women on top should be obsolete because, you really made it. I think Stella also, this is the way that you and your team sees your role, so this is the way, really. This is the, yeah, that's the case. That's the case, and I want to argue that, you know, although I'm a big fan and supporter of women-led programs, I think at some point we just need to start implementing projects and programs that just have a quote. You're not going to run this big next acceleration program unless you have minority founders, unless you have women-led startups of X, Y, Z. This is the case. This should be the case. So let's be frankly honest on this one. Generally speaking, I don't think Greece is an entrepreneurial nation. We're trying hard. We do. But, you know, look at us. Up until 2010, I think the majority of people here were more like, you know, let's find a good job in the public sector. Let's find a good job in a good multinational company or a Greek company, and let's, you know, have a more stability in our lives. Again, this change by force of nature means IMF or, you know, something similar. So again, you know, sometimes force, you know, change by force is good. I want to, you know, the way I see entrepreneurship, you know, it's actually 3 stages for me: inspiration, education, inception. You know, you get to start something, and you got a lot of different organizations happening in this country in all these different verticals. You have Open Coffee, you have the great events Women on Top is organizing constantly. You have TEDx events, you have all these things. You have, in education, you have a variety of events in which you go, so you actually get to fill in some gaps in terms of business development, marketing strategy, and all these sort of things. And then you have the starting up of the process, which essentially means that you need to have an equal ability to find financial or you know, other means of support to really kick things off. I generally believe that we need more women as role models to be, you know, to be as vocal as possible. And I want to keep an emphasis on a comment that Angeliki mentioned a bit earlier: real life entrepreneurs, because I think in this country we tend to overemphasize and overexpose certain people that are, you know, the exception, but at the same time we need, you know, normal people doing normal stuff, doing normally good and all right. So I need more people to really be able to say and see themselves in this person they have in front of them, instead of, you know, see the next Steve Jobs or see the next whatever that person, CEO in a Fortune type of magazine is at. So more real life examples that you can really associate with.
Great. And I think it's time to open questions to the floor to questions. So do we have any questions for the panelists? And do we have a microphone, or shall we just use our voices? Okay, so the gentleman here has raised his hand, and then the lady on the other side.
Hi, I'm Christina Deligiani from the Institute for Sustainable Development. Thank you very much for the insights that you provided when it comes to accessing finance for women-led businesses or female founders. As an institute, we do a lot of work in sustainable development and ESG, and we do a lot of ESG audits for non-Greek investors, non-Greek funds, for Greek assets in Greece. And of course, ESG has a lot of gender elements when it comes to governance, when it comes to social issues. You refer to some of those, like retention at work after women have families, how the hiring process when it comes to women. So these are issues that are brought up during the ESG audits that we do. And of course, the findings that we come across are not very encouraging. My question is, do you think that because there's so much pressure for changes when it comes to the gender element in Greek businesses from non-Greek investors, things will change?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm always scared of, you know, I mentioned before several times, you know, change by force. But at the same time, I don't want initiatives to just happen in order to have certain companies or stakeholders or establishments being ESG washed or green washed or whatever the term is. Meaning that I think you really need real intentions here. I think it's a start, because essentially that's what actually my first point was. Top-down approach in investing means you really stick to your thesis, and your thesis incorporates ESG criteria strongly, boldly. I'm just concerned, you know, seeing all these companies, these Greek companies, Greek entities or family-owned businesses talking about ESG. I'm not an expert in the field by no means, but are we really changing? I mean, I don't know. I hear a lot of ESG-like initiatives, but it feels like, you know, too many people are here for the jargon. And I witnessed this. I witnessed this in the startup economy, where, you know, many organizations started supporting entrepreneurs just to look good, okay, just for marketing purposes. You know, we've been in this process in the startup economy sphere in you know, for about a decade or more now. So the organizations that are still involved are the ones that really genuinely believe in what they were, you know, telling us. So short answer for me is what you're suggesting is a great way to go, essentially, but. Let's try to not forget to have a very critical approach on, you know, how we you know, judge things in terms of, do they really believe what they're doing? Do they really believe that that's the way to go? Do they really mean change, or do they just you know, in the jargon mambo marketing bus on board?
Can I just add? I mean, the interesting thing is that a number of funds are dropping their ESG side. Because they can't guarantee the types of returns. And in fact, the ESG returns, if they invest in ESG companies with a very heavy focus on ESG, tend to be lower for the time being. They could be more sustainable, but they tend to be lower, so they don't satisfy some, which is on average, which is a bit of a problem. But also the interesting thing on the other side is that if you look at funding firms or funds which look at all this, it is very often the case that the person who is in charge of the ESG element of it is a woman. So it's good news in some ways, because at least there will be a push to maybe do better in this area. Not just tick the boxes, but actually do better in this area. But it is a bit of a worry in case what is happening is that women just find themselves either in charge of diversity and ESG in particular firms, or in charge of doing the investment there, and they get sort of ghettoized into an area, which at the end of the day may actually not lead to the results, to very high results. And then we get back to the point that you were making, which is that, you know, women fail or look as if they are in the bit of the business that isn't doing that well, then that isn't a very good advertisement for women. So we are in a bit of a difficult position.
Thank you. Throughout history, at times of change, the social stereotypes break down, and usually, because of that, the ones who run faster gets first to the finish. If we take two examples of recent times, leaving aside history because that's a big question. From the mid-70s to about 2007, 2008, we had a time when what is being called capitalism has changed to finance capitalism. Then in about, at the end of this period, some financial bubbles broke down. And we entered into a period of global remedial management with countries and governments pumping taxpayers' money to salvage companies, both in the finance field and others. And somehow they managed to stabilize the situation, which sometimes it almost got out of hand. Now, reaching the question, which is the following. We saw two periods of change, which in aggregate, they are about half a century. During this time, we didn't see many women rising on top. You can mention Angela Merkel, Ursula von der Leyen, Christine Lagarde, and more or less this exhausts the list. Sorry, Margaret Thatcher was before. Margaret Thatcher was in the 80s and the 90s. It was in the 80s. Okay, you are right. I was talking about, yes, she was there too. Yeah, you are right. Okay, 4 instead of 3. Point given. The question is, what is your gut feeling of what was the reason, what was the ingredient that kept women out of the top jobs? Was it an inherent aversion to risk? Was it conservative, social conservatism, which didn't allow them to perceive fast enough what was going on, and they were not ready to jump to the situation? So please give me your answer. Thank you.
Well, it is a very difficult question. I mean, the answer is it varies, of course, from country to country. I mean, right now, if you look at Scandinavian countries and some of the former Eastern European countries, there are women in charge. In fact, in one of the Scandinavian countries, also the person in all the 3 parties are represented by a woman. I think that's just changed. That was Iceland, by the way. Admittedly, it's a small country, but important. What you find, and it's really interesting because it was mentioned in terms of the type of woman you need to be to succeed in business or even in politics in the past. You had to be more like a man, which isn't a particularly nice thing generally to have to do. And women also, you know, if you don't have the first role model, then perhaps you don't try. But it is actually even right now pretty difficult as a woman to be there and being outspoken. In fact, loads of women politicians just give up or don't even try. And we've just had the head in Scotland of the First Minister of Scotland give up. We've had the Prime Minister of New Zealand give up. So maybe we should reframe or redefine what being a politician is. Merkel, of course, was a bit of an exception, as was Margaret Thatcher. The real concern I have is that you have the odd woman who has made it to the top, and if they don't do well or if there is a problem, then you get exactly the point that was mentioned before. You know, you see perhaps we shouldn't have women on top because A, they can't take it. You know, look at them how they've given up. Or Merkel, of course, who is now attacked for whatever the policies were towards Russia, which of course have left a lot of Europe exposed to Russian oil and gas. So she has now a very bad legacy. So it's going to be written, why do you want another woman? And of course, in the UK, apart from Margaret Thatcher, we had a very interesting, I mean, this is the British Embassy, because I have to be very, very careful, experiment, if you like, with 2 women prime ministers who didn't quite do it. And there is something that I refer to in something I've written, but it's well known now. It's called the glass cliff. So instead of it being the glass ceiling, it is that when the situation is impossible, like after we voted for Brexit, or when things really were turning really bad after Boris Johnson was knifed and had to leave, another of our prime ministers, is that you let someone take over, usually a woman. It's an impossible job, and you watch them fail. You watch them sort of go, and then you don't have them again. So if you add all these pressures, women who talk about economics or against Brexit or whatever also get attacked. And I have to admit that because the BBC, but also others, have now a quota more or less to fill of women economists speaking at various things. So I have been very, very busy because there are very few who are prepared to just come out and say something about, whether the government is doing it right now or not. So there is a concern that it really gets very much into your life, your terrible time, and then you will be attacked if for some reason you're slightly, you don't quite succeed. Whereas, the likes of others, or men who've left, then go and make a fortune of doing other stuff. And it seems to be, like you were saying earlier, completely forgiven that you've been a failure as a prime minister.
I would also highlight the chief exec of Aviva. She came in 2019. She was absolutely berated in her first AGM, where she was told she wasn't the man she should be and she should be wearing trousers. She took the share price from £2.73 to, I think it's something like £4.46 today. So she's a really good rising star, and I think a really good example of the kind of woman that we would want to benchmark. And also, I would say our British football coach as well. She's a really good example of somebody who stays really under the radar. She's not trying to be completely out there, but has created a supreme British football team.
German.
Yes, and she's German. Yes, not German football team.
One more question. I think. Back there.
Thank you. Martha Condodemon from Conrad Adenauer. Do you want me to give the microphone maybe? Or we do 2 questions. I'll be quite fast actually. And excuse if the data had been already given and I didn't hear them. Do women ask for less money than men? So when they come for the microfinance or they come for bigger finance, do they actually ask for less money? Because usually, I know that we're usually like risk averse, so we will try to have like the minimum money for the maximum like performance, while men will be usually like, give me 500,000 and then we start negotiating. And I'll give to the next question.
It is the case that women will come with and ask for exactly what they need. And in many cases, we will have to convince them that they need a bit more so they can have a little bit of a safety net in order to do what they want. But it is the case that it's not that they will end up asking for less, but they will have excused every single euro of what they ask for.
My question is very related to this. My name's Ariadne Velisaropoulou, and I'm an angel investor in businesses predominantly founded by women. Research from Stanford Business School shows that when women ask for X, they are approached vastly differently than men are when they ask for X. And they are approached vastly differently both by men and women. So we're not berating the men for mistreating the women. So my question is, are women perceived, is the bar so much higher in the startup world that we just don't see these brilliant stars and we don't fund them? Because one, they're not asking for enough, and 2, we don't recognize how good they are because we're so conditioned.
I don't think I'm the right person to answer
No, because
this.
you're funding the women. Thank you.
We aim at funding women. So if we view them much more positively than in many cases.
It has to do with the amounts also, I think, but what you are giving to women, you're funding women with small amounts, and so do we. So this is something that they feel comfortable with. I think that the problem starts when you opt for higher, for bigger sums. This is where you see this discrepancy.
As part of my research for this, I actually found something that might be of interest to you. And it was according to the founder of Novi, which is a learning platform. And she basically said that it's to do with the networking and that the majority of networking at that level in networking funding groups tends to be men. And so naturally, there are fewer women in that environment. So you again get that perpetuation of the boys' club as it's perceived. So it's again getting that pushing down as well as pushing up to get the women up there in those circles in the first place to create the networking and be trusted in order to then be facilitated. And I think that was, if you look her up, it's a really interesting piece relating to her.
And this is a large part of what we also do as an organization. Networking is very important for us, and we do have many networking events for not only women to meet other women, but entrepreneurs in general to meet each other and see what synergies they can create with each other. And we find that this is a very, very powerful tool for supporting female entrepreneurs.
And I think just to add to that, women networking with men, and I'm really grateful to all you gentlemen that have turned up tonight, because it's actually us all connecting that will bring the parity and will bring that synergy of us all working together.
Well, Dimitri may have some views on how men look at this when women come, but again, the research suggests that women are put through many more hoops to just get the money at the end. The result, of course, is that their propositions are much better because they've gone through all that, and they're more successful at the end of the day. But it is a smaller percentage because they give up at some point, and that's the real problem. Dimitri, you may have a different.
Yeah, maybe I would just add that I don't have any concrete numbers and data to share, but I would argue that that's true. You know, in fact, women they were after less money from our, at least, investment experience, and I believe obviously this has to do with their sentiment that they might be underqualified for whatever reason. What's really interesting though is, and I don't have data about that, but I will mention it anyway, is that I feel that women-led startups, they keeping it real. They're not trying to convince us, by just throwing jargon, making up numbers, and just doing too much of a storytelling instead of substance. And I like these sort of people, actually. So we should, yeah. I mean, that's the case. That's the case.
I think Stella has a comment, and I think that this, two things. Yeah, if we can have a microphone. Okay.
Just to share two insights from the research. One was from the founders' side. A startup founder has been doing really well. She shared with us that she was the one resisting the startup asking for funding because she felt uncomfortable using other people's money and being responsible for it. And the men in her team didn't feel that way. They wanted to go after venture capital, but she wasn't feeling comfortable with it. The other insight came from the funders' side. And it actually came from a woman investor who said that, I think women go to investors and present their ideas with their flaws and their fears and the ways this idea might not work in the end. But on the investor side, people are not used to this kind of pitching. They are used to the kind of pitching that we will conquer the world. So if they hear someone describing their idea in realistic terms, in terms that involve doubt and reserve and maybe fear, they feel that maybe the idea is not that good or the team is not as strong. So let's choose the more confident one.
Say something on this? I agree 100% on this, and this is why I said before that we have to ask women why not you and not why you in microfinance.
if I can make a final comment here, if you watch Dragon's Den, that is a novelty on Greek TV these days. I mean, if you brace yourself and try to do it. I did it a couple of times for a while, but in one case, there was a woman who was presenting, a woman we had funded at her early stages, and it's exactly what you describe. I mean, she started highlighting the flaws of the business plan, saying that she has lost some money. So she gave a very realistic, she painted a realistic picture of the business, and then she opened herself to criticism. And criticism came from both male panelists and female panelists, and one of the female panelists, this is something, I want to write something about this actually, said this was a platform that has to do with educating parents. And one of the female evaluators said, "Are you a mother?" And she said, "No, I'm not a mother. I have a dog and 2 cats." If you're not a mother, how on earth can you pitch an idea that is targeted to parents? I thought it was so, I mean, if this is the type of person who appears on national TV to support entrepreneurship, we're doing something really wrong. So, but this is to prove this point, that most women are reluctant to not to show the truth. So that's yet another characteristic. Well, thank you very much for being here for this beautiful discussion. Do read the paper if you haven't done so. It's very, very useful. And we're looking forward to a version 2 in a couple of years, an updated version.